it's a really beautiful thing how you think thematically across all these things, you use common themes to kind of apply to open minds and to ceremony and ultimately to your life. So thank you for exploring into that and sharing with us today.
Thank you so much, Joss, for having me.
It's my pleasure. So tell us, let's start with open minds. Let's start with the science. Let's start with neurofeedback. And as someone, myself and listeners are super into human optimization, things of that nature, bettering yourself from an emotional standpoint, a physical standpoint, a physiological standpoint, a spiritual standpoint. What is open minds? Can you give us the background there and what that's all about?
Absolutely. So Open Minds Performance is my second business that I'd set up, and the origins was actually to help my son. So my son has ADHD, and it's actually ADHD PI. PI denotes predominantly inactive. So for him, it doesn't come up so much as hyperactivity or having a difficult time concentrating. For him, it really shows up through working memory, as well as being able to self-manage from an sort of an operation sort of way.
I'm not sure I understand.
More like executive functioning, right?
Okay.
So being able to plan your time, being able to regulate your energy in a time context, and being able to look at things from a bigger picture. So those were the areas that we really found that we were encountering from feedback from school, and even just observing his strengths and the areas that were challenging to him. That's really where it started. So I looked into various options, and for us, it just really, all signs were pointing to finding ways to build resilience in his actual brain. Not necessarily through medication, not that there's anything wrong with medication, but we knew that that's actually not the area where he really needed the support. So I looked into neurofeedback, and for me, when I did the math and I looked at the proximity of, the nearest clinic that offered from in bare bones, what do they actually offer in terms of their knowledge set, their support, their philosophy, so we were looking at sort of what was available in our geographical area, and then I just realized that I could have done this. I could do this. So I can put myself through the training. I can invest in the equipment. And because I know my son, I know then how to work with the tool so that it could help him. Mm-hmm. So that's basically how it started. So he was my first client. I was my second, and my partner was my third.
Nice, I like it.
And we, we just started there, and it really never was meant to be a business from day one. It only became a business because we noticed changes in our lives. People noticed changes in our lives, and people started asking about it. And so, what is exactly, open minds? I know I'm kind of answering the question in a roundabout way.
I love it. Go, yeah, for sure.
It is to help people reach their potential by facilitating the shifts in the brain that are inherently possible to access without medication, without other types of interventions. Because even the neurofeedback system that I use, which is a specific type of system called dynamic neurofeedback, and I can talk about the differences in a moment,
sure.
But dynamic neurofeedback is about building resilience and plasticity in the brain, not by inputting information, but by taking the existing information from your own brain and then mirroring it back to the brain so that the brain can sense it, perceive it, and be like, oh, well, I can change this on my own. And so it's through overtime with practice that the resilience and that, of course, the harmonious integration of the brain happens. Mm-hmm. You looked at me when you said, well, how does that work, basically? That's the look I'm getting from you. So if you...
I love it. I don't even have to ask the question. She just takes it right off the top. She's like, oh, no, I got you, Joss. Okay, yeah.
So if you wake up in the morning and you look at yourself in the mirror and you've got bedhead, the first thing you're going to do is fix your hair. And that's essentially, nothing was inputted into you. It was just information was mirrored to you, and you thought, oh, okay, well, I have this information now. What do I want to do with it? Well, for me, I've got a meeting to go to that might take me a little more seriously if my hair, was polished a bit. So I'm going to just quickly tweak that, and then you can sort of go on with your day. And that's how this particular neurofeedback system approaches it. So you have the sensors that's placed on your scalp. You're listening to an audio track, and it's just reading the information from your brain in terms of how it's operating. It's reading your brain waves, it's reading the proportion of the various brain waves with each other. And when it senses dysregulation, it will provide a very brief pause in the audio, and that's the signal for you. And oftentimes the audio, like that brief, I'll call it a blip, that pause is so brief that your conscious mind is not even aware of it. It's really subtle. And sometimes it'll be maybe like half a second long, possibly a second. A second of a pause is considered a really long interruption, according to the system's sort of norm. And when you hear that pause, over time, your brain learns, oh, I am causing these pauses myself. What can I do to shift out of these behaviors that are creating these pauses in the first place? So with that, your brain then starts carving new pathways. And for those of you who are listening, who are not totally aware of how neurons or our brain cells work, but it's very much about carving paths, and it's very much like a network that we can liken to, let's say, the infrastructure system of transportation in any given city.
Sure.
Main roads are very widely accessed by multiple cars and other vehicles. We can use those as symbols of information. And the smaller streets are a little less accessed, and the little back alleys are probably least accessed. And when you can give your brain a chance to access those less traveled roads, so to speak, it gives your brain the capacity to build more neurons in those back alleys. And it builds more strength, and it builds more capacity for your brain to learn, for your brain to reconsider patterns in a healthy context, in a way of where we can be more self-aware, and we can say, oh, well, I've normally been really reactive in this kind of situation. How can I be more mindful? How can I not be as triggered, and how can I work in a way that's much more effective and productive? And so what I found so amazing about neurofeedback, not only in my son's life, but I can just speak for myself in my own personal life, that I do tend to pause much more before reacting, and typically now I choose response versus reaction. And that, of course, has improved communications and relationships on all fronts. I've also noticed that I am less confronted with that little voice in my mind that says, you can't do this. And it's more like, okay, well, what can I do? And that's just through me working with this amazing tool. And typically you sort of start on a program of about 10 sessions. It's usually broken down to either, it depends on the individual and what their goals are, but about one session a week, one session every 10 days. And so after even just 2 months of this, there's some pretty tangible and noticeable shifts. It may not be noticeable shifts in the sense that it's not designed to quote unquote cure ADHD, let's say.
Of course.
But it can equip an individual into really feeling assured that they can handle life, and they can not only handle life, but they can really thrive in life. And I think that's, in the context of my son, to be able to see him happy to learn, confident in learning, and being much more nimble in these like uncertain, out of his comfort zone situations. I think it's just been really, it's really reassuring as a parent, and it's very affirming for him.
And when I don't know who planted the seed in my mind, but I had I think maybe it was a podcast or a book or something of that nature, where it said, for instance, if you walk to work, or, I take the SkyTrain downtown, then I'll walk to work from there. And, typically I'll take the same route. And now I make an active effort to go down weird back alleys, go an extra block around, go to the ocean and then come back, or just find a weird way, like even weaving throughout, buildings differently. The reason being that, if you stimulate your environment in different ways, if you see things from different angles, you create new, neurological connections and neural pathways. Is there truth to that?
Absolutely.
Okay, because that was just in my mind. I didn't have anything to back it up.
Yeah, absolutely. And I say this because I think most of us, we can agree that we are, as humans, creatures that are always looking for homeostasis. That's how we're built. And homeostasis does not typically like change, because change equals a threat to the environment, or very possibly a threat. And this is built into our evolution, right? So I'm going to talk a little bit about what are called beta brainwaves.
Please do.
So beta brainwaves has served us immensely in the evolution of human beings. So beta brainwaves are the brainwaves that are associated with fight or flight. And it's also associated with being able to think of the most effective, most efficient solution for this given time to get out of, this dangerous situation.
Sure.
So let's say way back in the day, a tiger would perhaps be something of threat to humans. And I've shared this before, not on a podcast, but at a talk. Historically, if you were to sort of, we'll use the metaphor of two sisters as a way to describe two different types of brains. So sister A is happy-go-lucky. She is super chill. She sees, beauty in everything, and, the glass is always half full in her eyes. And then there's sister B, who's skeptical, paranoid, definitely sees the cup half empty. And she typically goes around, navigating around the world, thinking that something bad, something threatening might happen to her. So let's say sister A and B are going for a walk in the grasses, and, there's this predatory animal in the background, let's say a tiger. And sister A is so busy admiring the beautiful clouds that she doesn't notice. And sister B, a split second out of that fear-based mind, notices a slight shift in the grasses that was not customary to what she was used to. So because she has that split second advantage, she outruns sister A. And, sister A loses that race, and she becomes the tiger's dinner. So over time, what we know is what survives and what is in us as, humans that have sort of left that type of lifestyle and are in modern society, is that the beta brainwaves, that survival-based brainwave, that fear-based, paranoid-based, wanting safety all the time-based brainwaves are highly active in us. But tigers aren't there anymore. I mean, maybe tigers are now represented through deadlines, through an upset boss, through a screaming partner at home. But for the most part, we respond to everything in life through fear, and most of us want order, want control, because that familiarity is what represents safety. Mm-hmm. So going back to what you said, this is why people want to take the exact same route to work each and every day in their commute, because it represents comfort, familiarity, and safety. And it sort of keeps the beta waves at bay, rather than allowing us to be able to navigate life a little differently, and actually calling on different brainwaves to help offset the beta brainwaves.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is that we continually attract or move towards beta brainwaves because it's safe, familiar, comfortable. We're about survival. We want to survive. What I know is safe. alpha waves are, could you go into maybe the different types of waves,
Yeah.
what they mean and how they affect us?
Sure. So I'll talk about alpha just
Sure.
because you've mentioned it. So alpha waves are associated with being like deeply in the body and alert. But it's not fear. It's more about being in the flow.
Flow states.
And this is why athletes work really hard to achieve that. And let's say, athletes spacing naturally on the court, being able to flow. And this is coming out of that intellectual place, right? Coming into this, I sense you, you sense me. We are harmonious. That's really what alpha is. There's something called Theta. So Theta is a little slower than, so like beta's faster than alpha, alpha's faster than theta. Theta waves are a very shallow rest meditative state. And theta waves is also where a lot of memories and experiences are stored. And those who, let's say, practice meditation or hypnotherapy, or even shamanic work, which we'll get to later, this is the area where the theta waves govern that. It governs the subconscious, it governs the emotions, it governs trauma. It relates a lot to early memories and a lot of belief system. And then there's something called delta brainwaves. Delta is deep sleep, and this is where cellular regeneration takes place. You're sleeping. It's a very slower, it's much, much slower than the other brainwaves. And then there's something, I'm going to jump to the other end. So there's different types of beta. So there's, low beta, mid beta, and high beta. And I don't want to say all beta is quote unquote bad. It's just that oftentimes when we're in that go, 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 what has to get done, that safety and that reward based mindset. But, a lot of planning, a lot of, intellectual, like highbrow intellectual thinking, that takes place there, and we definitely need it. It's just that when we are operating exclusive of the other ones, that's when it becomes a detriment. And then there's gamma. So gamma is more about, we're more associated with compassion, very big picture, universal thinking, thematic thinking, and it's less wrapped up in my story, and it's more interested in what's our story. So a lot of peace, a lot of resolution-based behaviors come out of the gamma.
Wow.
And so we all really do need all of these. And if I didn't have any beta, then I wouldn't have known to come meet you here to have this talk. So it's just that if that's all I do, if that's all I think, if my mind is always just operating on, that to-do list, then yes, I'm going to have anxiety problems. Yes, I'm going to have a hard time sleeping at night because I'm not going to be able to shift out of beta and shift into alpha and then into theta, which you have to get into theta to be able to sleep. And theta, of course, is also what governs dreams.
Of course. So we have alpha waves, deep sleep, regenerative, regenerating cells, et cetera, delta, deep sleep, rather. We have theta, which is more of a meditative state.
Meditative emotional.
And then we have alpha, which could be described as a flow state, highly reactive.
In the body, though, still.
In the body, still. Beta is more of a fear-driven state, more of a planning-driven state, more of a anxiety-driven state. And then we have gamma, which is compassionate, more of a sense of us, a sense of we, more of a biosphere consciousness. So we have all of these different ways to think and waves that are operating within our brain and different modalities within our brain. You spoke earlier about shifting from one way to another. This is one of, if you're a meditator, you realize that's one of the skills that it gives you is, within a second or a few breaths, you're able to downregulate or upregulate your system. And I don't actually know what that means, but I've felt it and experienced it, meaning like I've been in a beta state. This is actually a good example. Just before this podcast, we came in, we were a little behind, I'm in beta state. And now all of a sudden I'm here and I'm very present and more in an alpha state. So how do you change and shift those gears within your mind? How does that work?
Right. This is now kind of delving into hard neuroscience, and I think from a, like the key take-home pieces is it's through being nimble. This is what maybe you've heard of the word plasticity or neuroplasticity, is being able to be adaptive. And most of us, we've been trained not only through like today's culture, but through generational evolution. We've been trained to create a lot of compartments in how we think. And we live in an age where really the machine has taken over the creative. And when I say the machine, I mean this in sort of an Orwellian sort of context, right? like we are just cogs in this big landscape of functionality, without realizing that functionality is only one piece of highly optimal beings. Like there's that, of course, but then there's also something that's much more undefinable, much more creative. And what I have found working in neurofeedback and even in my shamanic practice is being able to really go into those areas of discomfort, really find your edges, and touching those edges, and even stepping, like even just one step beyond that edge. So, and I say this because, I have neurofeedback clients and they'll be like, wow, this session, I had a lot of little pauses, little, blips in the audio. I think my brain's like really out of it today. And I say, no, absolutely not. Like you're on your 8th session. We've been seeing huge progress. It means that you're now venturing into those edges with more confidence than you did before. And that's probably why you've had to go through this. And then we'll take a look at something called tunnels, which is this really fascinating diagram of their thought patterns represented like visually after the session. And it doesn't really mean anything. There's no such thing as a good tunnel report or a bad tunnel report. It's just what is.
Yeah, for sure.
But I'll look at it and I'll be like, wow, like compare this one to the past 3, and they look different. They're represented graphically really different, which tells me that their brain was able to sort of venture into those edges a little more. And I think it's important to know what those edges are, and to, rather than sort of be really safe and be like, okay, I'm always going to make sure there's like a 15% buffer before I touch those edges. It's nice to go to those places.
Right.
It's scary as hell, uncomfortable,
of course.
but once you get there, you'll be like, oh, I didn't die. Yeah. And I came back stronger. And the next time you can go there again and really push it even further and further.
That's so interesting. That's a concept that is so that is ever present across industries and people that we've had on this podcast. Like whether it's physiotherapy clinics speaking about stretching in the muscles and increasing your range of motion, whether that's people like yourself talking about pushing the boundaries in your mind and through your brain waves and in your consciousness to expand it and you just go and you actually get it further, and you have more flexibility within that, and you're more fluid within that, to like business people coming in and saying, well, yeah, it's important that from an organizational leadership standpoint, I slowly push the boundaries in a way that aligns with people's core values and ethics. And it's just like, oh my gosh, that is just such a key. And we can see it in working out. Like you want to get to 85-90% of your heart rate. You want to go to those boundaries and push a little bit beyond. It just seems like that's a common theme everywhere. I want to jump back to something you said early on. You said reacting versus responding, and this is something that you were able to change in your son, having that ability for him to take a moment. Is that what's the difference between responding and reacting to stimulus in your environment?
I think the best way to describe it is when you are reacting, you become victim to the script, and when you are responding, you get to write the script. And in the context of my son, he's able to self-advocate. He's able to self-advocate amongst his peers. For instance, he can say, whoa, it's getting really noisy. I'm just going to move myself to this quiet desk in the back of the classroom and just get this done. to self-advocating, with an adult. So for instance, if there's a substitute teacher, he can say, hey, this is how I think. Might not be the way that you're used to, but this is just how I need to do things to get it done. But at the end, I'll get it done for you.
Wow.
And that's through him just being much more aware and being able to, rather than say, wow, I have a really crappy teacher, or like, oh, everybody's so loud, which to me, those are signs of being victim of the script.
Wow.
Versus saying, nope, I can write my own script. Let me see what I can do. And what's great is people want script writers in their life because people want things easy. People want you to be happy. What they don't want to do is have to figure out what it is that's going to make you happy. So if you say, hey, I've got a cheat sheet here.
Yeah.
Can you just let me be able to do these two things? People are going to say, yes, absolutely, by all means. And then everyone's happy at the end.
Wow. But it's hard to be a scriptwriter.
It is. Absolutely.
It's hard. You have a lot of self-confidence, self-belief, self-regulation to be a scriptwriter. That's not easy.
It isn't easy.
That reminds me of, again, I think it was The Power of Now, Eckhart Tolle. I think. I always remember the tidbits. I never remember who said them, so I apologize. But I guess that's the important part. Something there that was spoken about through adaptation of mindfulness throughout your life is you start to realize your life is a journey, life is a story, and you're you realize that through your experiences you're writing the story, you're continually making it. As you get a little bit older, when you're younger, you think you're just a character in it. This is my place in the world. Whatever happens to me. I don't really know. I don't have too much control over it. And then you start to realize, yes, you're both the reader of the story, you're the character in the story, and you're the person that's writing the story all at the same time. And that sounds similar to what you were saying there.
Yeah. Can I just add one more thing to what you said? Because it is hard. But when I'm sharing like just those stories alone, that took practice, and that took a lot of intention, and it's not like one session with the neurofeedback system is going to get you there. But it will certainly get you there if the person is committed and they're willing to try. And in the beginning, it is going to be hard. It's going to be hard to say, hey, I'm going to move myself to the back of the room. Yeah. Right? Like it is going to be a little bit, what I like about it is my son realized it's much more positive when he places himself there than waiting for a teacher to place him there, because then then the script changes again. One is voluntary and proactive, and one is almost punitive. And he knows like how each of those feel, and he feels really empowered. And the more, when these small changes and these small steps and these small actions give him that feedback of, I feel really good, it just fuels him to continue.
Wow. I'd love to have an interaction with your son. That's incredible. That's amazing. I mean, most adults don't have that down in the slightest.
Oh, we're still working on it, of course.
Of course, no. But I mean, geez, these are concepts relatively new to me. I want to touch on a little bit. We talked about neuroplasticity, the ability to change the brain. I was wondering if you could touch on a little bit, because for those of us that don't know neuroscience and are not familiar with that, I think the common perception and narrative around our brains is, our brains stop growing, and we're not able to shift those our mindsets. We're not able to open up new pathways. And maybe you could touch on a little bit on how what practices you use in any facet to encourage neuroplasticity and why that's important.
Right. So I'm going to back up a little bit, and I'll probably give you a bit more information than you expected. But I think when I was growing up, I grew up in the 80s, so just some context here. Yeah, it was definitely sort of believed that by the time you're you're 18, your brain is hardwired, and it was always likened to a machine. Now we know that our brain is not a machine. Our brain is more like an ecosystem, and which means that it can grow and it can adapt. And if there's changes in the climate, it will adapt. It always has, and it always will. And the other piece is your brain really is still in development until about 25 years of age, which is really different than let's say 20 years ago. Now, with that in mind, knowing that our brain is an ecosystem, I think we can start looking at our brain rather than this set of, if we code our brain a certain way, which is very machine-based, it's more like, well, how do I treat my brain in the context of conservation in some ways, once you can talk about an ecosystem, and then also sustainability. Once again, talking about ecosystem. And so for me, knowing that my brain is an ecosystem, it's very muscular, and it is a network of information and a network of many different nuances, then how do I make sure that it remains sustainable? So for me personally, I do find committing to learning new things is highly important. And it's not even the content of what you learn. It can be, learning some geeky new craft, new for me, or it can be learning a new piece that I can add to my business. It could be learning how to set up, a website, which is something I've had to learn. And that was just mainly to save the costs. As an entrepreneur, you really learn how to cut costs as much as and run a really tight, lean ship.
For sure.
But I do find that the more I learn, the more of my confidence is growing and realizing, no, there's no way I'm going to know everything in the world. But yeah, I can try, and I can get myself at least sort of halfway there. And then when I get there, I can ask for help, right? Once again, it's sort of really seeing myself not as who I am today, but seeing myself as where I will be, X amount of time from now, and really seeing myself as a holistic person if I were to be very, macro, as a life. So there's that. I do find being in the Theta brainwaves to be highly helpful. I say that because most of us, what holds us back are emotional things. And whether or not we are wanting to admit that or are fully aware of that, but it is definitely emotional. So to be able to get into that place, into your emotional belief systems, into how you relate with everything, with themes in life, with food. These are core pieces that will define your health and will define, your physical health, your mental health, but then also the health of your relationships. So that's a big one. And then the alpha. I do find being in that flow state in an embodied physical way where I'm not necessarily I might be exercising or playing a sport per se, but even just in that state, in that joyous embodied state, even in my garden, that can be immensely supportive, because I just know me, I think a lot, I'm highly analytical, I'm in beta all the time, I'm project managing not only my own businesses but also my kids' lives, who do I have to pick up now, where do I have to get them, all that stuff, and life is not fun when it's just defined by beta waves.
I've never heard that before. But I agree wholeheartedly.
I need to make sure there's that diversity.
Right. Diversity in your brainwaves.
Yeah.
We need to make sure that diversity in our brainwaves exists. Okay. So when you say to encourage kind of neuroplasticity, you like to get into those theta waves, you like to envision a future version of yourself in future situations and future experiences, et cetera, that sounds a whole lot like that thing called manifesting. That's definitely a buzzword around these days. What are your thoughts around that word, that concept, et cetera, et cetera?
Did you read my posts on manifesting? Because I feel like you've definitely touched on a bit of a trigger point.
I didn't actually read your post, but okay. Please, I'm excited. Yeah, we stumbled upon it.
Totally. Okay. So everything that you had said up till now, yes, it definitely relates, certainly in the wellness or metaphysics fields, this concept of manifesting it actually has been circulating for a long time, but it's
Sure.
really become a buzzword of late. And, you know, I'm assuming that most of your listeners understand what we're talking about, but just, you know, just to make sure that everyone is on the same page, it's this idea that you attract the things that happen in your life through your belief system, through your emotions, through how you show up to the world, through what you contribute. And I would say to a certain degree, that is true. Unfortunately, what I have noticed specifically in the metaphysical or spiritual industry is that it's also a very abused belief. What do I mean by that? Well, it's a way to measure your worth against someone else's. Well, I've manifested this. Well, that's because I've earned it. You haven't manifested that. There must be something wrong with how you think. Without factoring in race,
Wow.
without factoring in age, without factoring in socioeconomics, without factoring religion, there's a lot of shades that are at play. And I have seen this, and I've called this out a fair bit through my my ceremony Instagram, that we're treading into really dangerous territory.
Yeah.
It becomes spiritual abuse to say, you know, so and so, you know, has a 7-figure income, and, you know, is living the life of their dreams and has like their place in St. Bart's and blah blah blah,
Yeah.
because they've attracted it, without actually saying, well, what were the things that played into that? Are they male? Are they white? Did they inherit this? You know, like, what were these conditions? And there's nothing wrong with being male and white. I'm just saying that there are these cultural, social, economical, gender, a lot of biases that are playing into these things that are subtle, that you can't just say, well, I manifested it through positive thinking. So that's a big one, and I've been definitely talking about that. The other piece that I've seen is also, to a certain degree, a bit problematic, is when spiritual teachers and spiritual leaders are saying, buy my book, take my workshop, come on this retreat with me, and you, yes, you, even if you're in the dumps, even if you're, you know, like $100,000 in debt, you are going to be making X, Y, Z after this session with me. And they promise things. And I could, like, it's a very capitalistic way to exploit very ancient spiritual wisdom, you know, wisdom that is rooted in, certainly in, there's Buddhist beliefs that talk about this to a certain degree, Taoist as well, and Vedic or sort of Eastern Indian, ancient Indian beliefs. So when people say, oh yeah, like, you know, let's work on your chakra that is associated with safety and security, I'm not quite sure if the sages then had intended for you to be driving a Bentley around. I'm not quite sure if that was the intention.
Right.
And yet it's widely talked about. It's widely exploited. And, you know, these beautiful teachings didn't come out in a highly capitalist and a highly overworked culture.
Well, what I'd say to that is I think that happiness was just defined differently. We've just
absolutely.
defined happiness by a Bentley. And so, right, I mean, that's what we're saying
yes,
here. It's like,
absolutely.
Oh, no, you're going to be enlightened and happy and joyful because you're going to have a Bentley.
Right.
That has no bearing on anything
Yeah.
in real life. So it's like, yeah, maybe those initial teachers didn't intend for it to be interpreted that way. And that is my personal fundamental concern, or what I nitpick with religions is exactly that. It's like you're taking beautiful core principles and core teachings and manipulating them for capitalistic gain. And for that reason, I'm out.
Yeah,
right.
Totally.
And so that's what draws me personally to alternative personal operating systems and religions and ways of thinking, But when these are all tools. Every tool can be manipulated. Every tool can be used for good or used for bad. These things just are. Whether you interpret them or use them one way or another, that's up to you. That's up to the teacher. That's up to the organization. That's up to the church, however it may be. And so there's a lot of people that will say, I'm against religion because it is manipulative. Well, you don't fully understand the situation, right? Like, I mean, love thy neighbor, is that manipulative? Like, you know what I'm saying? So,
Right.
And I think that, shamanism and more spiritual ways of thinking can be manipulated the same way. Like, it's because you had bad experiences here. That's because you didn't sage your apartment. So shame on you.
Right.
It's just another way of casting judgment.
Absolutely.
Which doesn't serve us.
Totally doesn't serve us. And I think at the end, it leaves us all very impoverished.
Yes, absolutely.
Like, you can be very fine. Like, even if those principles, which, I mean, they don't, even if those principles do make you filthy rich. Sure. Is your heart feeling that way? Like, is your heart feeling full? And I think it's what you talked about, the happiness piece. I don't think that there's no, I mean, there's correlation between, some base, like, you need a bare minimum to be able to live a happy life, right?
In terms of dollars.
Yes. But after that, it's really quite inconsequential. Yeah. Everything else after is it's the soft skills that you have, it's the relationships you have, it's your outlook. And so going back to the manifestation piece, even me being in the industry, I'm confronted this all the time, and I'm definitely in this place where it's just like, I have to say something. It would be irresponsible if I don't. And it's really important for me to make the distinction so that my clients know where I stand and what I mean when I say manifest. And the other thing is this. A lot of people are looking for these very quick snake potion solutions.
Yep. Snake potions.
Right? Like, no, really. But nothing happens overnight.
Of course not.
Like, you have to pay your dues.
And nothing's effortless.
You got to work hard. Nothing is ever effortless. So to think that you are attending some retreat where you're taught a few little spiritual teachings, it's like, and boom, like, your life is going to be transformed like that. Like, that's a bunch of lies, right? You absolutely still have to do the work. There is, fine. Like, even if you went to this retreat or took this course or whatever it is, read this book about, being an amazing attractor of good vibes, of wealthy vibes, right, whatever you want to call it, that's 1% of that inspiration, because there's still 99% of perspiration that you still have to put in. And I don't believe that work is bad. Right. Like, I think that's the other piece. People have come to this place where your work should feel like labor and toil and unpleasant. I do think that there is a lot of joy that can come through work if you're invested in it. You might not even like it in the beginning. Like, I've had jobs growing up where I just thought it was really mediocre. But the more personal investment I put into it, the more pride was involved in it. And then, I look back and I'm like, no, I'm really happy I did this. Totally. And so, I don't know. I
think we need a new word for work. Work is one of the words that I despise. Like, work is one, meeting is another one. Office is a third, where it's just like, all of these things are just the worst, because first off, like, work has a negative connotation. Totally. I don't work, and I don't want to be those one of those guys like, hey, listen, I love my job, I never worked a day in my life. That's not what I'm saying. Like, work is just a process of building. For me, that's what it is. Right? And meetings aren't, business deals. Meetings are conversations. They're just an exchange. I'm like, oh, sorry, I can't talk right now, I'm in a meeting. Fuck that. I want to say, I can't talk right now, I'm in the middle of an exchange with somebody. You know what I'm saying? And that sounds really weird, but that's truly what it means to me. office is like one of these things where like, yeah, we sit down at a desk and we do paperwork. Like that's not what an office is to me. Like an office is a vibrant place where people come together. Like coffee shops can be offices now and stuff like that. So I need new words for these three things. And this is something I've been thinking about so much because, as you know, like our linguistics, they define how we think. And I'm like, I need a way to redefine these three words because my life revolves around those in a way. And I need to reframe those in my mind and then communicate that outwardly. I don't have those words. So maybe marinate on that a little bit. Get back to me if you have any new words.
I love how you've mentioned that, especially the word work.
Right.
I've had a fairly alinear career.
I'm sorry, alinear?
Yes, alinear career. So my first undergrad is in graphic design, and then I worked in the industry for some time, particularly in surface design and product development. And then after I went back to school and I got my early childhood education, particularly with a Montessori focus. And the reason why I bring this up is because when I was training to become a Montessori educator, we talked a lot about language, right? I mean, we're here working with preschoolers, so 30 months to 6 years of age, right? Just before they get into kindergarten, or it could be up to that. And we talked a lot about language. And one of the words was work. And we never use the word play in the program because we wanted to get kids to understand that play is work and work is play. And we never had a thing called playtime. We never had a thing called work time. It was just you step into the Montessori classroom, and it's a beautiful space, as always is, because we really believed that, at least all the ones I've worked at, and even the Montessori philosophy, is that when a space is inviting, and it's inviting curiosity, and it's inviting engagement, children will naturally want to learn. And they're not going to call that work.
No, of course not.
But we called it work because we wanted their experience, their first experience of learning and their first experience of like formal, more structured based learning to feel playful. And so we thought, well, we're not going to call it play because that's almost, in a sense, it's oversimplifying what it is.
Right. So rather than redefine the positive, you're redefining the negative and reframing it.
So, I mean, it's the same sort of idea that you're saying, just a different kind of approach.
Interesting.
So kids would say, oh, I'd like you, Miss Mimi, to show me how to work with this.
Cool.
And we're like, okay, well, let's do this.
Cool. So whereas I was like, screw that word, let's find another word. You're like, no, hold on. Let's just change the meaning of that word. Which is really cool, and I think you can do from a young age. I'm in more of an entrenched position with that word. I don't know if I'm going to be swayed, but it can happen.
I'm trying to sway you anyway. It's all good.
So and that defines how we think about everything. I don't want to skip over this because this is really cool. Montessori is a way of teaching, a way of learning.
Both
is just a way to think about the world. For those that have no idea what that word even means, can you kind of dive into that? Because you first explained it to me a couple of weeks ago, and I was like, holy shit, this is crazy. It's like I just saw in 6D for a second. That was insane.
Yeah, so the Montessori method was designed by the very first female doctor in Italy named Dr. Maria Montessori. And she designed this program because she had a huge heart for the underserved children in her community. So she designed a program that was designed for those who were either orphans or mentally challenged in some way, or had experienced some type of trauma. And she really felt if she could just design this program and give them the tools that they need to be able to thrive, they can then be admitted into, more schooling. But if they didn't have these foundation skills, they would forever be disadvantaged. So she designed, this is in the Montessori preschool program. It's widely within the industry known as the Casa program. And that was what was first designed. And then later on, there were sort of additional pieces that were added on. But the Casa program involved 4 distinct areas. One's called Practical Life. And she teaches young children basic life skills. How do you put on your clothes without someone helping you? Like, how do you put on buttons? How do you open buttons? How do you tie knots?
It's tough.
How do you wash hands? So she taught hygiene. That's very important. And how do you...
Totally,
Yeah, right?
sorry.
Like, how do you use a knife safely? How do you cut an apple?
You know what? That's hilarious, because it's like these kids, me being one of them, if your parents aren't around and you've never been taught basic life functions, that just completely gets skipped over. And then it just, whatever way you've kind of made up, just sticks.
Totally.
It just sticks. And that comes back to bite you in the ass in so many ways. Anyways, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, for sure. Because a lot of times what you do is whatever works. It may not be
exactly
right. Like it's almost like a coping perspective rather than a thoughtful perspective.
Absolutely.
So the kids as early as 30 months learn how to use a knife safely.
Wow.
And that was mind blowing. And in the Montessori program, if you were to, there's even something called an infant toddler program. The kids learn how to use cutlery to feed themselves from a very, very young age. I've seen 9-month-old babies feed themselves with a fork.
Wow.
I'm thinking, wow, how's that possible? And she was approaching it because she was a doctor.
Right.
How do you approach things in a way that I can scale up, that can be promoting as much hygiene as possible? So once again, the washing hands.
Sure.
Learning how to wash dishes, all these things. These are all kind of part of the practical life, so that they then can take on more intellectual-based learning later on. So there's something called, once again, the practical life. Another module piece was called sensorial, which is taking in the world through your senses.
Okay.
And this is where they learn about not only colors and shapes, but about things such as, when there's one thing that I love, one material is called the color tablets. And the color tablets is learning how to take, let's say, 7 different shades of green, and then learning how to put them from lightest to darkest. And that is very, very subtly talking about the foundations of mathematics, proportions, percentages, all these things. And also it becomes a way to discover and explore the world through an artistic lens. But she really just understood that. Moving on, there was something called math, and then there was something called language. So those were sort of the 4 pillars of the program. And what I shared with you when we first met, which I love, was her approach is always you start with what is physically in front of you, and then you can, from there, kind of branch out. She also really believed in understanding things from a very big picture perspective, and then kind of narrowing down into the most minute. So her understanding of math, which is what then fueled the program's approach of math, was get the kids to touch quantities. And then later on, they can deal with the operations of, the 4 operations of math. So you want them to understand 1, give them 1 bead. You want them to understand 10, string 10 beads on a single line. Get them to understand 100, you string 10 strings of 10s. So then at the end, 1 bead is this tiny little speck, 10 is this 1 straight line, and then 100 is 10 of these 10 straight lines, which becomes 10 by 10,
which
right?
Becomes a cube.
It becomes a square, and then 1,000 becomes a cube, because then you have 10 of these hundreds, and you stack them up, and it becomes a cube. And then the kids, once they understand this, they can A, visually understand, and then they B, can visually and 3-dimensionally represent it. And then they now can understand, okay, well, 5,000 is essentially 5 cubes, and each cube has 1,000 of these little beads. And then that really makes up the basis of the decimal system.
Of course.
So I found it to be immensely inspiring for me, and I was able to really not only look at that in approaching teaching young kids, and then even just teaching teaching, even just the kind of teaching I do now, just because it's like, okay, well, how can I start with the concrete and then go into the abstract? How can I start with the relatable and then go into the unrelatable and so forth? Because that's really how people learn.
Oh my gosh. Yes, no, totally. You just said it right there, was starting with the concrete and moving into the abstract.
Yeah.
Because there's exactly that. There's a disconnect between what I see in front of me and what I can imagine. And it's very, in such a subtle way, organizing shades of green, building blocks through basically an abacus style, in terms of, you're very simply putting beads on a line, and beads on a line become a square, and then they become a cube. And all of a sudden I'm building the pathways to understand what the journey is, or what the connection is between concrete in front of me and things I couldn't imagine. And for those of you that are like, well, how does this apply? Because this is very philosophical in sense. Like, for instance, if I say to you, if we see on the news, John Doe won $63 million, you go, wow, that's a lot of money. But it's just a lot of money to you, right? Versus if you can think in this way, you actually understand what $63 million is. You're able to contextualize it. And because you're able to contextualize it better, you're able to manage it better. And that has direct implications on outcomes in your life through this very simple concept of taking what's concrete in front of you and being able to imagine and then manifest and create and tangibly work with the abstract. The ability to, no one ever talks about this, the ability to tangibly work with abstract concepts and tangible things is maybe the greatest skill of all.
Totally. I mean, it's what makes us human, right?
And that's what you do on a day-to-day basis. It really is taking these huge ideas and thinking in a way that's irregular. And being able to really take abstract thoughts and play with them like silly putty, that's so cool. That's on a tangent there. You got me going, but where I wanted to go with that was exactly what you kind of linked to earlier, and that you have two businesses, two sides of you. One is very concrete. I can see brainwaves. Right, we can chart these out, right? And the other is very intuitive. One is very tactical. One is very intuitive. One is concrete. One is abstract, and that's what makes you so interesting to me. Because it's one thing to sit a person down as an expert in one thing and thinks very thoughtfully and is very experienced about one thing, and those are good conversations about that one thing. Versus if you come in here, I have no idea what this conversation is going to go, because we could use this way of thinking on 100 different topics, 100 different things, go 100 different ways about it. Back to Montessori, right? But that's what it is. So I want to contrast that a little bit with, how do you, from a tactical standpoint, you live in a world of science, and you counteract it with a world of spiritual experiences, and things that are not tangible, things that you feel and you can't see. How did that shift come to be for you? And how did you kind of go from this person who was, graphic design to, working in primary schools and now into entrepreneurship? How did you kind of stumble upon what now has become ceremony and core shamanism, et cetera, et cetera? What was your journey like there?
Right. I think there was one point in my life where I had these very clear boundaries between, me being this way, me being that way, and putting as I sort of leave one area, I would switch my hats and put on the other hat. But I think at this point in my life, I don't really even see it as different hats. I just it's just another facet. It really is all one. Because if it's purely scientific, and I would say that a lot of scientists are highly intuitive, like the good ones.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah. They have to be skeptical, absolutely have to be skeptical when they are pushing boundaries and on that edge. But how would they know what edge to push into if they didn't have that intuition in the first place? Right. And I would even say, same thing with spiritual, people in the spiritual sector. If you're just spiritual and sort of soft and fluffy all the time, you're going to frustrate a lot of clients.
Yeah.
Clients want people who are responsive, who reply to emails, who do what they say, who aren't just a bunch of flakes.
Yeah, he's a great shaman.
Right?
I can't reach him for fucking 6 months.
Exactly.
He's lost in a forest.
Right. And you have to be able to keep promises and like be reliable.
Use those beta waves. Yeah.
So I see that the integration is really important. How do I get into shamanism in the first place? How much time do we have? Do you want the long story?
We're fine. Let's go into it. Come on now.
Okay. Well, I just want to say that I have shared this on other podcasts before, so I want to be mindful of maybe listeners who have listened to my other podcasts.
Sure.
But I will still mention the key bits, and maybe if there's something that you want me to deep dive a little, then I'm more than happy to.
Let's do it.
So I would say that I've been fairly intuitive from a very young age. Like I have early conscious memories, very, very early conscious memories, like, around 3 years old-ish, speaking to plants. And of course, back then, I was told that they're just imaginary friends and I have a very active imagination and, that it's not real. As a young adult, so around 19, I started experiencing paranormal scent. Some people call it clairolfaction. So I'm using the word clair, let's say, instead of clairvoyance, or clairaudience. So clairvoyance being able to see something through a vision, or clairaudience being able to hear something from a source that's not physically with you here. Olfaction is smelling something that is not physically in the room. So it's more like spirit smelling. So I started experiencing that around 18, 19. And I would say that's probably my, other than me being able to talk to plants like at a young age, that'd probably be like another step into that shamanic world. But I didn't even call it shamanism then. I didn't really know what it was. At the time, I was actually attending church with my mom. So she was Buddhist. She converted to evangelical Christianity when I was in middle school. And my father's an atheist. And so, I've always just sort of been in this home where, maybe you don't believe in anything, or maybe you totally believe in a very specific type of thing that actually tells you exactly how to do things and how to live your life and, exactly how to believe things. I think at that time there was definitely a little bit of what's going on? But I knew it was there, and I sort of pushed it away in the beginning, but it got to a point where I just couldn't ignore it anymore because it was happening so much. And I started documenting it, in a journal, and I started making sense of what smells equal what thing or what meaning. And so eventually I would smell things and I'll, most of the time I'll know what what the spirits are trying to say to me through the scent. And that could be like, call your mom, she probably needs you, or needs like a good, just like a little virtual hug via phone, or call your friend so-and-so, or did you turn off the stove, Mimi? Or like little cues, right? Like little safe kind of cues or little nods or even warnings. And then, so in my search for understanding the meaning of that, I started exploring with tarot or tarot cards. And I did that because I really believe that tarot, it's a spiritual language, right? It's represented through visual symbols and thematic symbols. And I just had the sense that if I understood that, I'll probably be able to figure out not only what I smell more, but also what I dream. And so I taught myself that, it took a number of years to really get good at it. And so that sort of all happened sort of 20s into early 30s. And by then my first son was born and we had left church by then. And then in the middle, we were, working a lot and also trying to have a second child, and it just never happened. And so finally, got to a point where I did get pregnant again, and I was able to retain the pregnancy, past the first trimester. And very soon after that first trimester, I started hemorrhaging. And that from my previous miscarriages, I had a few, I was like, oh my gosh, like that's how they started. So I thought, oh, this just can't be happening again. Yes, this can't be happening. I can't be losing another baby. Like, no. And it was early in the morning. I was getting my son, ready for school, lunch made, all that. And the doorbell rang. So I go down to the door, open the door, and there's nobody there. And he and I are like, what? You heard the doorbell? Yeah, I heard the doorbell. And then we look across the street, and there's my spirit animal, a heron. And so the bird just looks at me straight at me, and then it flies away. And through that, I was like, yes, this pregnancy is going to be fine. Like, this baby will be fine. This baby will live. I didn't know the how, but I knew it was a message. And so there'll be these little sort of messages here and there, like omens, whatever you want to call them. But my first experience with a shamanic journey, or in a shamanic journey, was when I was on bed rest with that second child. So basically, I was hemorrhaging, and I got a lot of tests done. They couldn't figure out what it was, so they put me on bed rest, and it was a 5.5 month bed rest. So from early in the second term all the way to week 37 of my pregnancy.
It's a long time to be in bed.
Very long time. Yeah, it was hard.
Excruciating, I'm sure. Yeah, sit still for 5 months.
Right?
Yeah.
It's brutal.
Yeah.
My beta waves are going, ah! But I decided to meditate during that time, because I thought, well,
don't have anything else to do.
Nothing else to do.
Yeah.
Let's be really productive. Let's learn how to, come in and out of those brainwaves.
Right.
In a nimble sort of self-regulated way.
Yeah.
And it was one of those days in meditation, I accessed that spirit world, and I met a few more of my allies, and they said some prophetic things, which came to unfold exactly how I was told later on, and I knew that I tapped into that like a whole new place. And so I would say that was my first experience in that world. And then later on, I won't go into all the details, but later on, I did find a second generation female shamanic practitioner off of Vancouver Island, who taught me more the formal language and the safety and the ethics. I still keep in touch with her from time to time. And, I've worked with teachers such as Vicki Noble. She designed a shamanic tarot deck.
Oh.
Like a beautiful deck. The deck is called Mother Peace, and so where she co-created it. And she's still alive and well. I mean, that deck's been around since the 70s, if I'm correct. Don't quote me on that. I think late 70s it came out. And I think just a lot of pieces just sort of came together. So I think everyone's initiation is different, and and I'm careful to make sure that I refer myself as a shamanic practitioner, not a shaman, because I don't come from a lineage of shamans. I'm not indigenous to a shamanic tradition. And I'm not diminishing work by other shamanic practitioners, but I just really want to make that clear distinction, because there is a difference. And there's even a difference between those who practice shamanism in their own modality. So for instance, there may be Reiki therapists that practice some shamanism. That is still different than, let's say, a shamanic practitioner, because I almost exclusively work in this realm. And, I've made commitments to the spirits and into sort of my, my personal accountability to what it is that I do.
Sorry, could you pull the mic a little bit closer?
Sorry.
Yeah, for sure.
So I've made personal promises to the spirits, and making sure that I'm accountable in all aspects of my life, which is a little bit different than let's say someone who integrates shamanic disciplines in their practice. Not to say that that there's no ethics around what they do.
Sure.
It's just a different type of commitment. I think my commitment is really with the unseen world, and it just materializes here in the seen world. Hopefully that answers your question a bit.
She went. No, it's great. It's awesome. I love. I can give you like a half eye wrinkle, and you're like, okay, no, he wants me to go this way, and you just have this way of interpreting. I don't even have to say anything or do anything. It's just like you're gone. You're going the directions that we need you to go in, which is beautiful. There's a lot of directions to go off of that. Maybe you can break it down for a simpleton like me. When I go, okay, so she's a shaman versus, what is that? Versus she's a shamanic practitioner. Okay, what is that? Is that the same as tarot cards? How does like I've spent some time in the Caribbean and have some experience with voodoo, and I'm like, well, is that the same? Like, I don't.
Right.
Can you make this a little bit clearer in my mind and in listeners' minds, maybe?
Sure. So let's talk about shamanism, period, as a discipline. So shamanism is typically an earth-based practice. So you are in relationship with the earth.
Okay.
And you're in relationship in the sense that they are not at your beck and call. You're not some, how maybe Hollywood depict a sorcerer.
Sure.
Like, they wave their wand and boom, this thing happens. Yeah. But they're in relationship with the earth. And I mean, like, maybe plants or animals, or even the elements like sun or fire. That's another element of,
Sure.
Fire and sun are the same thing essentially, or water or wind or air. Like, those are elements, and they're working with them to seek counsel, and then deliver that message to people, to other humans. And so typically the practitioner or the shaman himself is acting as a bridge for that to take place. Oftentimes there's divination. So divination is looking into the future of what has not yet happened, into potentials, and then saying, yeah, this is probably the most likely thing that's going to happen. It's obviously based on what the person does with that information, because if they choose to turn left instead of right, then the outcome may be different. But judging on the current circumstance, how it's going, this is the most likely outcome. And I do a fair amount of that in my readings with clients. They will say, what does my next 2 years look like?
Sure.
Or, what is my next move in my work, or whatever it may be. So yeah, there's a fair amount of that kind of work that those in shamanism will do. Sometimes they'll do things like create harmony between the spirit world and the physical world. So maybe there's an energy from the past that continues to impact you today. And it could be through somebody in your lineage that no longer, lives in three-dimensional physical form, but something from your lineage or from your line is still affecting you. Or it could be even like you as a soul, you've lived in another time and place, and that's still affecting you. So some people in that, in shamanism will do that. There's also some magic. And when I say magic, I don't mean like
Harry Potter.
Well, kind of, but kind of not, right? Like, I mean, Harry Potter, I think, is highly romanticized and stylized. And it's also approaching as like they are the master of the world, and they're calling these spirits at their beck and call. And with shamanism, like, you are just another component, right? Like, there's no hierarchy, so to speak, and certainly the practitioner or the shaman herself is not at the apex of that hierarchy.
Meaning they can ask.
You can ask, but you can't command, right? But you may be able to, which is a little bit different, let's say, than witchcraft. It's kind of venturing into something else, or even voodoo and so forth. Like, you're manipulating energies in a little different than, let's say, shamanic work. But oftentimes there may be sort of working with certain plants that will optimize conditions. For instance, I may work with plants that will optimize my tendency to get more information through my dreams. And then when I wake up in the morning, then I can sort of recall and write that down, that type of thing. That's how the name Ceremony came about.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. I didn't know what to name her, so... I work with some plants before bed. I asked my spirit allies, went to bed. First thought when I woke up the next day was the word ceremony.
Cool.
Boom. There's things you can do in that way. So would be shamanism. You asked about tarot. So tarot is, it's almost like a book, but it's not a book. They're represented rather than through pages, they're through cards. There's typically about 72 cards in a deck, but it differs from deck to deck. There's many different styles, many different creators or artists behind these decks, but it follows loosely a theme. And the theme is composed of two sections. One is called the Major Arcana. The other is called the Minor Arcana. And the Major Arcana would be the big picture themes that a person typically goes through. They'll go through the theme of, or the archetype of a fool, to someone who has mastered some elements and is starting to manifest.
Wow.
So that would be, for instance, the magician. They may go through an archetype of being a lover. They may go through an archetype of being a hermit. They may go through an archetype of playing with the devil, like all these sorts of different themes. And we all have gone through it, right? Like, I mean, when you think about adolescence and early 20s, there's a lot of devil energy, right? Like lots of playing with risk and danger and things like that, and shadow. And essentially, it's a story that most humans go through. Might not necessarily be in that order, but these are, archetypal themes that most humans go through.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but they're kind of seasons of our lives.
Seasons of our lives, right?
Okay.
And they're represented by like specific characters, because that's like an easy way to communicate these ideas.
Which is essentially what you do. Like, I don't mean to cut you off here, but that's essentially like my interpretation of this whole thing, Very, is you simply translate. You're a translator. That's in one way or another. Some people translate languages, some people translate energy, some people translate experiences. You kind of do all the above, and saying, this is what this means, or this is my interpretation, this is my translation. And if anyone that's worked with language knows that the best people that translate are people that don't translate necessarily the words, but they translate the idea.
Yes.
And that's kind of the common theme that I'm seeing a little bit here. So like, whether it's, I will go to one of these people that work with energy in these ways, and we've named them, and it's like, I'm looking for someone to spell this out for me, my surroundings, my energy, my whatever it may be, everything that's in my domain right now, and translate that to me in a way that I can understand. Am I kind of right?
Totally. Cool. It's you're interpreting it for them.
Thank you.
Right?
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
Absolutely.
So sorry. There's a deck of 72.
Right.
They interpret seasons of your lives in various ways, but they're written differently. There's various different cards. I'm confused about the whole thing.
Yeah. So what I just described up till now was just the major arcana,
Sure, okay.
right? So and that is not all 72 cards are part of the major.
Oh, okay.
There's something called the minor too.
Oh my gosh.
And the minor are 4 suits, and each suit starts with an ace. And it finishes with a 10.
Wow.
And then there's something, and this is you're going to be able, exactly where I'm going here. Then there's a jack. And there's a queen.
Okay.
And a king. And once again, the 4 suits.
Yeah.
And the 4 suits, there's something called a pentacle or a diamond. Something called cups or a heart.
Wow.
There's something called clubs or wands. And there's something called swords or spades. Right. So that's where poker cards came from. It came from tarot. Because when...
What?
So when the witch hunt happened in Europe, and, the church, the capital C church, was eradicating.
Sorry, what do you mean by capital C church? For those.
Well, when I say the capital C church, I mean like the missionaries and the system, like the state, right? The state that was saying this is the only acceptable and legal way to be. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying a small local church. I'm saying like it was a whole system. Yeah. And they were going through the earth-based practices and saying this stuff is of the devil. Mm-hmm. The tarot had to go into hiding, and it came out of the hiding because it transformed into a deck of playing cards.
Crazy.
And if you really think about it, there's still certain parts of the world where playing a pack of playing cards is still considered of the devil. Like very, very traditional, orthodox, not all, but like there are some like sects within Christianity that they don't touch the cards. Wow. And it might be because there's gambling involved sometimes when you play with cards, but it's also just because there is this old memory that it links to tarot.
Wow.
So the minor arcana, which is what I just talked about, those are the flavorings of the themes. Those are the accessories. So because a lover might look like many different types, like the lover archetype might wear a jean jacket, but it might wear just a sweater, or might wear, and so the minor kind of are just sort of the accessories, and it gives that personal flavor to the story. So you need both to be able to tell that story. And when a tarot reader is shuffling the cards or asks, you as a client to shuffle the cards, shuffling is really just putting energy into something. And you're asking that question, and they'll lay everything out at the end. And of course, where the card is placed and which card, is in that specific placement, it will mean a different thing. And the combination of cards will mean a different thing. They can tell a lot of very, very accurate, like eerily accurate information about you or the circumstance or the question that, is related to the reading. But what's interesting is it's immensely human. And I think for me, that's why I love it, because it's like what you said, that's a part that's relatable. That's a part where it's feeling based. That's a part that is also, it just transcends. It transcends trends. It transcends belief systems, because humans are humans. Like we're all going to go through these experiences. Like there's this card called death. We've all experienced death, right? It's a thing that scares us. It's a thing that, it's the edge. And we all think that if we go to the edge, we'll die. But what's amazing is when you emerge out of death, you completely transform, and you're wiser and stronger, and all that. So I think it's a very accurate way to explain the human condition. The light side, the shadow side. And it certainly has experienced, like tarot has definitely experienced a resurgence in probably the past 5 or so years. It's part of pop culture now for the most part. Like the fact that we are talking about it, for
sure. That's crazy. Yeah, no, there's definitely a renewed interest in it, hands down. It's I had no idea around the history of it. That's pretty wild. I really didn't know that it relates in those ways. Maybe we could get a little bit more into what you do and how you work with people and what your business is about, and how you because you have all this background knowledge and have laid out the philosophy and a little bit of the history, and it's like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. But what does she do? If I'm a listener, I'm asking myself right now, what does she do? Right. So how do you work with clients? How do you work with, how do you interact with the world in this sense? Because you spoke a little bit about the capitalistic nature of things, interrupting, what's pure, what's good, what's genuine, what's true to form and true to nature. So how do you interact with this all, and what feels right to you? How do you work in this space today?
Right. I think for me, if I were to sum up my work with Ceremony, it's to connect clients to the spirits, to their spirits, number one. And B is to remind them that they are their own healers. I'm not here to make a client relying on me forever. I don't want them to be emailing me every other day saying, I don't know what to do. What do my spirits want me to do? Blah, blah, blah. Because then you're creating a dependency. So typically they come see me. And there's a variety of different ways. Either, and when I say see me, they may not be like face to face, because I do have clients outside of the city. So their interaction with me may be an online course or a series of online courses. It may be attending an event in Vancouver. It may be asking me to do a reading for them and I'll talk about the reading a bit more in depth in a moment, but I'll answer this question first.
For sure.
So it might be, so they might be asking me to do a shamanic reading where I go into the spirit world and bring back insights for them in their specific context and their question. It could even be working with plant medicines that I have a collection of plant medicines. And the plant medicines I work with, just to be really specific for your listeners, are common plants. I do not work with entheogen plants. So they're not psychedelics. So, and I use them in a way where it will support your aura and even support your skin. My collection, there's like a shamanically made skincare line as well as an aura care line. And of course, a lot of times, clients wind up sort of integrating a little bit of everything. They might take a specific course and use a couple of the aura care just to sort of support them in their search. It may be the sort of a one-time thing. It might be like a short-term thing, for like about 6 months or so, and then I might never ever see them again or interact with them again. And they may come back a little later, that type of thing, as they level up. But that's really at a core what it is that I do. I think the big thing is I like to say the work that I do is helping people remember. And what I mean by remember is R-E and then hyphen member. So think of the word in the context of dismember. When we dismember something, we've lost something that's part of us, right? We've lost an arm or a leg. When you remember, you're reattaching that piece that has always been part of you. So most of my clients report that they have a heightened sense of intuition, that they're better able to integrate that science part of themselves with that spirit or intuition part of themselves and be that one and be in flow. And they're really optimizing both tools because that's what humans have. And then the other piece is that they just feel so much more connected and aligned with their personal purpose.
Okay. So there's oh boy. There's a couple ways to go. Let's go this one though. So you have this sort of interaction with your clients. There's products that there's ways that you can monetize off that. I guess my question to you would be, is we're both in practices, in professional lives that are almost all professional lives where there's exchange of money can go left. And how we interact with our professions really defines our ethics and our values. I find okay, so you can have one line of work, you can be a doctor, but that doesn't tell me anything about you. It's my question to you would be, is how do you interact with in your businesses? How do you interact in the ecosystem you've created of ceremony? That feels right versus some other ways you could go? What is it about you or your business that stands out to you as saying, okay, well, some people do it this way, but I've chosen to do it this way for these reasons?
Right. Well, you are the company that you keep. So I'm really careful about that. I'm not hanging with every spiritual healer and mystic out there for very specific reasons. And that's, locally. And it's also, internationally, just because we have something called technology where, we have that option to be able to do that. So that's number one. Number two, I do give back. So 2% of my wholesale and my event sales and my one-on-one does go back to a pool, and then 5% of my retail also goes back to a pool, and the pool is divided into scholarships for clients who would like to take courses with me but don't necessarily have the means to, and the other bit goes back to the Nature Conservancy of Canada. The Nature Conservancy, that organization, it took me, I just didn't want to give back to any environmental cause.
Sure.
For me, being a very a very responsible charity was a big piece. Like I didn't want to be donating to a charity where most of their funds are just put into marketing or, you know, like cheesy leaflets and like assets that I get in the mail that are a total waste of money. Because do you read pamphlets?
Of course
I don't,
not.
like,
Yeah.
So for me, I just, I had to do that due diligence and make sure like which charities out there are the best managed according to my metrics.
Of course.
And yeah, it came down to the Nature Conservancy, and then they happen to have a division which is like for Canada.
Awesome.
Yeah, so I mean that's another way.
Sure.
And I think a big thing is I feel that you know, if there's ever like, and this happens, a client comes to me, they're like, hey, this is what I'm looking for, and I say, I'm not the right person for you. Let me refer you to so and so. I think it would be a much better fit. I just don't really believe in seeing people as competition.
Yeah.
You know, we're all here to help other people feel more in tune, more alive, more in their purpose. So if I know that I'm not the right person for them, it just makes no sense that I'm saying that I'm the right person for them. Like I need to make sure that they're placed, they're matched with someone that is the best fit,
Right.
according to what I know, right? Like, I mean, I obviously have my own limitations, but at least I'll tell them why. I'll say, well, this is why I think that so-and-so may be a better practitioner for you.
Wow.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. No, many people in many professions don't do that. This is a little bit off, but do you do any work in any past life regressions or any of that? How much, like when clients come to you, what are they asking for? And is that one of the things they're asking for?
Right. I would say for my remote shamanic readings, and okay, I can get into this now, right?
Please.
So remote shamanic readings are when a client asks me to travel to the spirit world to explore a specific question or to get just to get some type of answer about that specific topic. And answering your question, yes. So the most common questions are, what is my life purpose? I have this, okay, that's question one. Question two, I have this wound. I have done everything humanly possible to address this wound. I believe that it's of a spiritual root. I don't even know if it's from this life or a previous life, but could you please explore that? And if it's in a previous life, is there anything you could do to resolve that in the previous life? So that's a very common question I get. Question three is, another one, a really common one, especially if they're a new client, is who are my spirit allies? Why are they my spirit allies? And, what can I do to be in communion with them, in my everyday reality? And a fourth one would be, the love question. Like, is there a person out there for me? Yeah. And sometimes it will be sort of I'm at a crossroads. Is it option A or B? Like that happens a lot. And I would say that those questions are probably the same questions that tarot readers get and psychic mediums get. I just approach it differently. I don't consult cards, even though I can, but that's just not really what my offering is. And I'm not a psychic medium, so I don't, have that ability to just sort of immediately download that information through spirits. I have to go through ritual and go into it. So how it looks is typically someone will email me and say, hey, I would really like for you to go on a journey on my behalf. This is what I'm looking at. And then we'll find a time that I'm available that they would like me to journey. And the reason why I have to say that is because sometimes it might be symbolic, right? So it might be like, if it's a love thing, maybe they're leaving a relationship and they're stepping out to another one, and they definitely don't want or do want me to explore it on a specific date because it represents something for them. But it doesn't really matter whether or not they're available or not, because they're not involved in this other than giving me consent. They're not physically with me in the room. They don't even have to be in the same city as me or time zone or whatever. They give me the permission. I give them a list of, steps of what they can do to enhance their receptivity to the information once I come back. But that doesn't affect my reading. It just helps them be more open to it. And then on that said day that we agree upon, I go journey. If it's a new client, I have to befriend their spirits, because if I'm not friends with them, they're not going to share anything with me. It's just like humans. So I have to earn their trust. And so I earn their trust, and then I ask them the question or present them with a request. And then typically it's shared through, for me, it's not like this for other practitioners necessarily, but for me, it's highly visual, and sometimes it involves scent and, maybe some feeling. And I take in all that information, and then I come back, and then I type it all up in a massive email. And as I'm typing up that massive email, I'm still in active trance. So I'm still highly in that Theta brainwave state. And this is actually what's really unique to our conversation, is that because we've spent time talking about brainwaves, your listeners really get this benefit of understanding of why this works. Because I'm able to really look at things from that. It's unbiased in the sense that I'm not personally invested in it, but it's also very factual because I'm relating to these memories and these desires from a very emotional place that will be very receptive to the client, because that's why they're asking. Most people don't come asking me something if they don't have questions, if their heartstrings aren't pulled in a certain way, right? Like, so for me to be able to be really relational and be like, yes, like that thing that you worded as I'm concerned, it's actually not concern. You're like fucking panicking and very stressed out about this, because now I get to see it in the journey.
Right.
So yeah, in this world, I'm typing up the narrative. And so that email, there's 3 parts. Part 1 is the narrative, the shamanic narrative. This is what happened. This is who I spoke with. This is what they said. This is what it looked like. And then part 2 is the interpretation. That thing that happened, well, that means this. This animal that showed up, well, when that animal shows up, it means that you are most likely gifted in this capacity.
Translation.
Yes, all the translating happens. And then part C is, here's your spiritual homework. And so there's tangible, call to action, so to speak, your CTAs at the end. And yeah, so it's this massive email, and then I beep, and it goes off to them.
How do you come up with those CTAs? What is that? How do you figure out what the homework is?
Well, sometimes it's provided through the journey itself. Sometimes it happens to be this theme around, let's say, archetypes. I might provide a couple books, some Jungian archetypal healing books that I know that is immensely helpful in this particular topic. There might be some herbs that I know provide spiritual support in that theme, and I'll just list them. Yeah, and so, and it's it's unique to the individual, and obviously some herbs will be more widely recommended than others,
Right.
and there are some that have more of that generalized medicine, and other ones are very specific, so I'll talk about that. But I think what's amazing is that this person then gets this roadmap, and they can refer to it for a very long time.
Totally.
Depending on the question, of course.
So now I'm interested now to see how do you form that connection with that person? That's the only thing that's like, well, how do you? You know
what's really amazing? So when they book, I have no idea who they are usually, unless it's a repeat client, which is different. But if they're a brand new client, I have no idea who they are. Right. I don't ask them a single thing. I don't ask them, what's your birthday? Where were you born? I don't ask them the typical astrologer stuff, because astrologers, they need those things to be able to,
of course,
put together a chart. I don't, because in my work, that's not relevant. Doesn't even matter, like, you're gendered. Like, none of it matters to me. I just need the question and the consent. That's it. After the journey, that client feels that I've known them for decades. And I feel like I've known them for decades. Because what comes through is so it's so intimate and special and like unique to the individual, and it's wilder than fiction. Like there's no way I can make it up. And they know that I can't make it up because there's things that I'm telling them that are so private and so personal that they haven't told anyone else. So how could I have known that, considering I don't even know what the birthday is? And I think that's what's so special, because the spirits have a way to make sure that humans are supported as long as we are receptive to their support.
How do you hone this skill? How have you honed this skill? How has this, your interpretation, grown from 1918 to today? What was it like, and when you were first working with your first clients, to your skills today? How's that kind of changed?
Yeah, I would say that, well, practice, right?
Practice, of course.
Tons of practice. But I feel that I've been practicing through the clarifaction gift that I have, and through me, daily working on interpreting my own dreams, my own nocturnal dreams, and then working with tarot, because the spirits use that as a medium, right? To explain things to me. So for instance, if there's a lot of water in Journey, like be it if it's a lake or a river or an ocean, and depending on how tumultuous the waves are, that is telling me a lot of information right there.
Of course.
Right? Like I know this is a highly emotional person, or this topic is really making them feel pulled, and they don't know how to they just don't know what to decide. They don't know which way to go. And then what I mean by practice makes perfect is the more you do it, the more spirits you meet. Now I know that if a person has, let's say, a panther for an ally, they're most likely very entrepreneurial. I just know that because I've done enough where the theme continues.
Right, I see.
Or if there's, like, let's say a snow leopard, highly likely they're very good communicators, and that typically will come out through being verbal communicators, or they're writers, or that type of thing. So
very interesting. How do you think about death?
I think about it a lot. But I don't see it in a morbid sort of way. I work with death a lot, just because a lot of my work involves speaking to ancestors. That's another question that I get commonly from clients is, can you speak to my, great grandmother, or that kind of thing.
Sure.
I don't call them up from the dead. It's different. I go visit them. So there are, for instance, going back to, like, let's say, in certain magical disciplines, you call back the dead and they come here. I don't do that. There's some dangers around that, because you can displace them. You have to be very savvy to know how to make sure they have a way to go back. So I don't do that. I go travel and I go to them, and I get whatever information or, loving words, and then I come back here. So I'm the one that's doing the traveling. But going back to the death piece is, I think it's just a very natural part of life. We've already gone through deaths. When we left our mother's womb, that is in many ways was a death. A death of what our normal was, and we entered into a new normal. And we've gone through many deaths. Every breakup we've had, every new job, job ends, a new job, every end friendship that sort of fell apart, we've died many times. You've had a surgery. In some ways you've died, because then you had to go through this period of recovery and maybe some really honest questions of your identity. When I left maidenhood and entered into motherhood, that was a death. It was a death, and me understanding, how do I relate as a woman now? My physical body and the tangible, let's say, stretch marks that remain, those types of things, to how do I make sure that I'm still cared for while caring for others, my children. And so I think in some ways we're really scared of death, but we're really familiar with it too. And once we're dead, it doesn't matter, because we're going to be dead and we won't be able to, we won't even know that we're dead because it's over. Or we get recirculated, in a sense, back to like a greater story, right? You come back, maybe as a different human, maybe as a different expression. I have my thoughts on it, but there's no way that I factually know until I've gone through it. But I have a feeling we've gone through it already. We just don't remember.
So what you're saying is that a physical death, a biological death, is really just an identity death. That's really what that just is. It's just
another chapter.
Just another chapter. It's just another way through. What are your personal thoughts on it then, of that physical death? Because this is maybe the biggest question.
Yeah, no, it's true.
In
right?
history.
It is, because I think this is the other piece that makes us humans.
Right.
I don't think our primate ancestors thought about that.
Right.
I don't think they thought about, what am I going to do?
Yeah.
After,
who am I going to be? How is it? What's next?
I don't even think they're totally cognizant of death, right?
Sure.
For me, I believe that we're energy, and energy is never lost. It just changes. That's, borrowing Einstein. And that the form will probably look different. And the deaths that I have gone through, the metaphorical deaths, it's always been better, like once I entered into the next chapter.
Sure.
And so I'm not too fearful of it. It's not to say that when someone you dearly love leaves, that it's not sad. But I don't think they're sad. I think we're the ones that are left behind. We're the ones that are sad.
Of course.
But there's gifts, right? Yeah.
See, this type of thing, death is one thing. The whole shaman, the whole magic, all of that is so interesting, because as we progress through time, like for instance, in the year 900, we thought that, lightning was the gods, or whatever it may be. And as we continue to go and science continues to develop and grow and goes deeper, more micro into ourselves and more macro into the universe, we continue to debunk things that were used to be called magic, or, worked in kind of these weird realms. And now they're, oh no, this works this way, as we kind of thought it did previously. We just called it something different, but we know it works this way for these reasons. And this is how the universe is governed. So with that, it's interesting for me to have these conversations with a person like you at this point in our scientific development, to be, okay, what is out of reach, what is in reach, because you work in spheres that are within reach scientifically and out of reach scientifically, which is super interesting. And that gap is our progression, and is what's next, and is the future, and gives us hints. And I'm not saying all these things are going to be right or correct, but it gives us a good direction to go into. With that context here, how do you think we're going to be thinking about these themes in 100 years, in 200 years, in 500 years? What do you think the thought's going to be then?
Well, if the Earth is still around.
If the Earth is still around, or we're still here. Yeah. The Earth will be here, whether we're on it or not. Is a different.
Right. I think, for me, science is really interested in talking about quantifiable, tangible data.
Right.
And, going back to thunder or lightning as gods, people who say those are gods say it because they came from the understanding that, wow, like this force brought extensive change. Right. Right? Like this lightning bolt hit this really dry tree in this really dry forest.
And
like,
gone.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, whoa. But the fact is, thunder's still thunder, lightning's still lightning. Devastation and change still happened, and new growth came out of it. Right? Whether or not that was a moral thing, like, oh, I did this, and then, the lightning gods smited this tree,
yeah.
is a different thing. But the fact is, change came through, and they were, maybe some didn't survive and some did, but, adaptation happened. So for me, I feel that I think what I love about my work is, you totally talked about this earlier, is I love looking at themes, and I love applying that to maybe something that didn't necessarily embrace that theme in that same way. So I think the future of science is being able to be better at that, being able to integrate more. You see it right now. Science, I think a lot of change is going to happen in automation and algorithms, and more humans are going to be out of work, out of conventional work. I think there'll be more and more humans that are taking on more than one job, just out of survival and perhaps out of having multiple interests. And I think, humans are going to just need to get really creative. We know this because education from a systematic perspective has failed humans today, because it's based on a very antiquated system from before, right? Education system as we know it right now is based off of what equipped people for the military and for agriculture. Well, that's just not how humans operate anymore. So things have to change. So there has to be bridges made between neuroscience and child development, more so than it does now, and how that, and education. And I would say to a certain degree spirituality, because I think this huge boom of people interested in tarot and in mysticism is because people are in deep search for meaning. And you can quantify it all you want and describe it all you want through data, but if it doesn't mean anything, it really, what's the point?
We're totally in a meaning crisis and a purpose crisis. Right? It's crazy. A lot of people don't even realize it yet, but it's here, it's evident, and I'm truly an optimist, but I do believe it's going to get worse as we go here before it gets better. So these things might help us bridge that gap. Now, geez, we covered so much, but now, as you're, how long in this practice? You've been working in this field for a while now.
Well, yes and no. So Ceremony will be coming up to her 4th birthday.
Okay.
On Boxing Day.
Okay.
But that's like
great time
formal.
to launch a company.
That's like more formal, right?
Sure.
Like,
well, your experience, your education, when does that date back to?
Well, I don't know. Back to when I was 3 years old.
Really?
I don't know.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And I think for me, it's, what I'm sharing with you right now is things that you can see. But I think prior to that, there was a lot of internal struggle, right? Like, and the internal struggle is, no, there's no way that I can pick this stuff up. Like, there's no way I'm that kind of intuitive. Like, I'm normal intuitive, not like that kind of intuitive. There's a lot of this, like, am I ready to come out of the witch's broom closet, so to speak, right? Like that kind of stuff.
The witch's broom closet, that's hilarious. Yeah.
And then there was the, oh no, like, there's no way I can make this my 9 to 5 because, like, no normal person does this, like, as a 9 to 5. And, oh no, but I don't wear like goth clothes and like flowy clothes and all this. Like, I'm very, like, kind of in many ways mainstream. Like, I just was really struggling with this internally. So the reason why I bring this up is because I think all those parts are really important to talk about in giving birth to a company. Because when you finally give birth to a company, you've essentially have asked those questions and have maybe not completely put them to rest, but you've confronted them in some way.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wild witch entrepreneur. I love it. That's hilarious. That's so funny. So now, throughout all this, what are you fired up about now? What are you trying to learn about now? What are you trying to wrap your head around now? What are you interested in? Where are you going?
I'm really wanting to bridge ceremony with open minds in a much more obvious way, rather than seeing them as two separate businesses.
Right.
I don't know what that looks like yet. I know there's so much room for them to work together because, well, I mean, you can tell this conversation is really representative of that. You can't separate it. What I need to figure out is, how do I put that together as an offering? How do I communicate in the way where people understand?
Yeah, for sure.
And what does that look like? So that's one. For 2020, I'm also really excited to continue offering online courses. That's something that I started offering this year through CEREMONIE. And it's exciting. It's exciting to see what people enjoy learning. And what I like about how I've set up my online courses is that if you've missed it, it's okay, because if you've signed up for that course, and let's say we're operating out of a different time zone or something, you get the replay link. But even if you've missed that, I'll still have it available as an on-demand on the website. So if you've missed a specific course, no big deal. Like, that information is still there. And so I'm just trying to find ways to utilize, let's say, readily available technology to allow these really ancient practices be accessible. And then, remote shamanic readings. I'm astounded by how widely it's been received in even just the past 6 months alone.
Wow.
Before, it was sort of this like hush thing. Oh my gosh, like I'm seeing this like shamanic practitioner, and like people are whispering about it. But now people are like super open, and I get referrals all the time, and they're like, yep, I saw her for this particular thing, and this is how it's been helpful. And I think it's also an indication of where the masses comfort level is in this type of work.
Beautiful. So speaking of modern technology and communication technology, how can people get in touch with you? Where are the channels you'd like to direct them to?
Well, I am on Instagram. So for CEREMONIE, it's at shop ceremony, and ceremony is spelled with an IE at the end. And then for Open Minds, it's at Open Minds Performance. And then for websites, it's shopceremony.com or openmindsperformance.com.
Amazing. Mimi, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate you bridging the gap.
Thank you so much, Joss. This has been so fun.
Thank you.